The Great Cathedral and Selbereth, Keeper of the Light. On the edge of the known world, beyond the mist-draped peaks of the frozen mountains and deep within the veil of ether, stood the Great Cathedral. It was a structure of unspeakable beauty, a monolith of Gothic architecture, so vast that its towering spires disappeared into the heavens and its shadow stretched miles across the sacred land beneath it. To many, the cathedral was a myth, a whispered legend told by storytellers in taverns and campfires. To others, it was a destination, a pilgrimage that would bring them face to face with the divine. The Great Cathedral was no mere building, it was a living thing. Its stone walls breathed with the soft hum of ancient hymns. Its massive stained glass windows shimmered with iridescent colors, casting moving patterns of light across the stone floor as if the building itself communicated through beams of radiant beauty. Carvings of angelic figures adorned the vaulted ceilings, their eyes, once thought to be mere decorations, glowed with an inner fire, watching all who entered. Few had passed through the cathedral's heavy doors, and fewer still had lived to tell the tale, for the cathedral was not just a place of worship. It was a sanctuary, a fortress that guarded the one thing that tethered the mortal world to the realm of magic, the portal to Agadam, the legendary underground chambers where all magic in the world was born. But to think of the cathedral merely as a guardian of a portal would be to do it a disservice. It was far more than that. Within its hallowed halls, an order of angels ruled, ethereal beings with wings of dazzling light and strength beyond mortal comprehension. They glided silently through the high arches, their silver and gold armor gleaming, their wings trailing feathers that shimmered like the stars themselves. Each angel had a purpose, a task assigned from the moment they were drawn into the service of the cathedral, and they executed their duties with divine precision. At the heart of them all was Selbereth, the silver-winged, the one who reigned supreme. She was the embodiment of the cathedral's soul, the keeper of the light that bathed its interior in otherworldly radiance. Her wings, unlike the others, were not gold nor white. They were silver, delicate as moonlight, but sharp as blades when unfurled. She stood tall, her celestial armor an intricate weave of silver and light, and her eyes, pale, cold, and full of wisdom, held the gaze of any who dared meet them. Selbereth's presence was a force. To walk near her was to feel the weight of eternity. To speak with her was to sense the endless cycles of time turning in the vastness of her thoughts. She had ruled the cathedral for longer than any could remember, her connection to the portal and Agadam running deep, for it was said that Selbereth herself had been born in the underground chambers and risen to her station through a divine act of magic. Under Selbereth's command, the angels of the great cathedral performed their sacred duties. They patrolled the corridors, watched over the worshippers who occasionally found their way within, and, most importantly, guarded the portal to Agadam, which lay in a chamber deep beneath the cathedral's foundations. This portal was no ordinary door. It was a shifting, shimmering tear in the fabric of reality itself, a vortex of light and shadow that pulsed with the heartbeat of the world's magic. No one could pass through the portal unless Selbereth herself allowed it, and her judgment was not something to be swayed by mere mortal pleading. Though few had ever entered the cathedral, many knew the stories. Of those who had ventured within, most were pilgrims seeking to atone for their sins, offering their lives to the cathedral's protection in hopes of glimpsing a higher truth. Some came seeking healing or blessings, and though they were often turned away, those deemed worthy left the cathedral with their bodies and souls mended in ways that defied explanation. There were, however, others, those who came seeking power. They knew the tales of Agadam, the center of all magic, and believed that by finding the portal, they could gain access to that power for themselves. These were the ones Selbereth watched with the keenest eye, for she knew the hunger for power was dangerous and easily corrupted. In the shadows of the cathedral's great hall, hidden behind the columns of stone that reached toward the stars, were the broken remnants of those who had failed. Their bones lay scattered like forgotten prayers, their voices silenced by their greed and ambition. Selbereth showed no mercy to those who sought to disturb the balance of the world's magic. To attempt to breach the portal without her blessing was to face annihilation, for the cathedral was not merely a guardian of magic, it was magic itself, woven into every stone and whisper of wind. And so, the great cathedral stood as it always had, its colossal form a beacon of both awe and dread. Its halls echoed with the footsteps of angels, their wings stirring the air like the breath of a distant storm. And at the center of it all, Selbereth, silver wings folded around her like a cloak of moonlight, watched with unblinking eyes. There were whispers, even among the angels, of a time when the cathedral's purpose would change, when the portal to Agadam would open once more, not to a chosen few, but to all who sought the power of magic. The stars themselves seemed to tremble with anticipation, and the winds of the frozen mountains carried strange omens from faraway lands. But until that time, the great cathedral remained. Its massive doors closed to most, its mysteries hidden in shadows. Only Selbereth knew the full extent of what lay within its depths, for she alone had stood before the portal and seen into the heart of Agadam, the place where magic was born, and the place where, one day, the fate of the world would be decided. Until then, she waited, her silver wings shimmering in the eternal twilight of the great cathedral, guarding the ancient secret that pulsed beneath her feet, and keeping watch over the fragile boundary between the world of men and the realm of magic. Selbereth's dilemma. For centuries, Selbereth, the silver-winged, ruled the great cathedral with an iron will wrapped in grace, a paragon of celestial authority. Her face was the portrait of serenity, and her demeanor, untouchable. To all who beheld her, she was perfect, an angel untainted by the flaws of mortality. But beneath the gleaming armor and the silver feathers that fluttered like whispers of light, there lay a secret, buried so deep that even Selbereth herself had not dared to confront it fully. The secret had a name, Elios, and he had once been a guardian like her, an angel who had served at her side in the earliest days of the great cathedral's creation. He had been her equal in power, his wings of gold gleaming brighter than the sun. Together, they had protected the portal to Agadam, and in those days, the bond between them had been more than mere duty. They had shared a connection that transcended the laws of the heavens. But Elios had fallen to the temptation that lurked within the portal, the ancient, dark magic that Agadam whispered to those who grew too close. Selbereth had been forced to banish him from the cathedral, her heart heavy with the weight of 1,000 shattered promises. The light in her wings had never seemed the same since that day, though none but her could tell. Yet, the memory of Elios was not her only burden. Selbereth had another secret, one she kept locked away even deeper, more dangerous than her feelings for a fallen angel. In the depths of her soul, she had always known that she was not born of the light, like the other angels of the cathedral. She had not ascended from the divine realms of heaven, but from the very heart of Agadam itself. She was a creature of magic, born from the deepest currents of the world's power. This truth haunted her, though none knew it. She had always feared what it might mean, how it would change the way her angels viewed her, how it might even sway her own will if ever the dark forces of Agadam called to her. But Selbereth had never wavered, keeping her inner turmoil locked behind the impenetrable walls of her stoic demeanor. Until now. The adventure begins. One evening, as the cathedral lay bathed in the pale twilight of the eternal sky, Selbereth felt it, an unfamiliar tremor beneath the stone floor, as though the very foundation of the sacred place had shifted. Her sharp eyes darted to the portal's chamber, far below, though she was standing in the cathedral's highest spire. The portal had stirred. This was no ordinary ripple of power, it was something new, a force greater than anything she had felt since her days guarding it with Elios. She spread her silver wings and flew toward the heart of the cathedral, her mind racing. As she descended, she passed her fellow angels, who bowed in reverence, unaware of the unease that coiled within her like a shadow. Upon entering the chamber of the portal, Selbereth stopped short. The portal had changed. Where once it had been a mere shimmer of light and shadow, now it pulsed with a dark radiance, a crackling energy that seemed alive, hungry. It was growing, spreading tendrils of magic that reached out as if seeking something, or someone. And there, standing before the portal, was Elios. He was different now, but she would know him anywhere. His golden wings had darkened, now tinged with black, and his eyes, once filled with the purity of light, now held the gleam of forbidden knowledge. His presence sent a shockwave of emotion through Selbereth, awakening feelings she had long tried to bury. "Elios," she whispered, her voice like the wind over the cold mountains. "You should not be here." He turned to her slowly, a smirk on his lips. "I was never far, Selbereth. You knew that." Her fingers tightened around the hilt of her sword, the silver blade humming with holy energy. "You betrayed the cathedral. You betrayed me. Why have you returned?" Elios stepped closer to the portal, his dark wings fluttering behind him. "Because something is happening within Agadam, Selbereth. You can feel it. The magic is awakening, but not the way it should. Something is coming through the portal, something even you cannot stop alone." She hesitated, her heart torn between her duty and the memories of what they once shared. She had never told anyone about her connection to Elios. He had been erased from the cathedral's history, his name never spoken. But seeing him now stirred something deep within her. "Why should I trust you?" she asked, her voice barely more than a breath. "You fell to the darkness. You allowed the magic to corrupt you." He laughed softly, a sound both bitter and filled with regret. "I may have fallen, but I am not lost, Selbereth. Not yet. And neither are you." His words struck her like a blow, and she stiffened. He knew. He knew about her origins, about the truth she had hidden for so long. "The portal is calling to you," Elios continued, his voice soft but insistent. "Because you are like me. You were born of Agadam, and the magic within you is awakening. You cannot hide from it any longer." Selbereth's wings twitched, her heart pounding. He was right. The portal was not just calling to her, it was drawing her in, pulling her closer with every beat of her heart. The darkness within it echoed the darkness she had always feared lived inside her, the magic that connected her to Agadam. "I can help you," Elios said, stepping closer still. "We can face it together. The power within Agadam is greater than either of us can imagine. If it is not controlled, it will consume this world. But if we harness it—" "No," Selbereth said sharply, her wings flaring wide. "I will not fall as you did." His gaze softened, and for a moment, she saw the angel he had once been, the one she had loved. "I fell because I was alone, Selbereth. Don't make the same mistake." Silence hung heavy between them, broken only by the pulsing of the portal. Finally, Selbereth spoke, her voice low and determined. "If you wish to redeem yourself, then help me. But if you falter, if you let the darkness claim you again, I will destroy you myself." Elios nodded, his eyes steady. "Agreed." Together, they turned to face the portal. It pulsed and crackled, the air thick with magic. Whatever lay beyond was waiting, and Selbereth knew that this would be the true test, not just of her strength, but of her soul. For in the depths of Agadam, her destiny awaited. And the line between salvation and damnation was thinner than ever before. The Siege of Shadows. The sky above the great cathedral darkened. Not with the gentle twilight that had long bathed its towering spires, but with a shadow so deep it seemed to devour the very light of the world. Clouds swirled like a maelstrom of ink, and from the distance came a faint but growing rumble, like the heartbeat of some colossal, slumbering beast. Selbereth stood at the balcony of the cathedral's highest tower, her silver wings spread wide, catching the thin rays of light that pierced the thickening gloom. Below her, the angels of the cathedral moved with precision and purpose, their gleaming armor catching flashes of light, their swords raised to the sky in readiness. They had sensed it too, the presence of a great and ancient evil closing in on their sacred ground. And at its center, there was her, the sorceress who had long dwelt in the shadows of the world, gathering power. Her name was whispered in fear among even the darkest corners of Agadam, though few dared speak it aloud, Moreveth. For years, the sorceress had coveted the power of Agadam, seeking to twist it to her will. But she knew that the cathedral stood in her way, and Selbereth along with it. To claim Agadam's magic, she would have to break the cathedral's defenses, subjugate its angels, and defeat their radiant leader. And now, Moreveth had come to do just that. As Selbereth watched, a great wave of darkness swept over the horizon, moving unnaturally fast. She narrowed her eyes, her wings twitching as she caught sight of the first shapes emerging from the gloom, twisted creatures of shadow and bone, their forms shifting and undulating as though barely tethered to the material world. Above them flew dark-winged beasts, leathery wings beating against the wind as they shrieked into the night. At their head, riding a chariot of shadow pulled by nightmares, was Moreveth herself. The sorceress was draped in robes of deep purple and black, her pale skin glowing faintly beneath the cowl of her hood. Her eyes burned with an unnatural, violet light, and in her hand, she held a staff of twisted iron, the tip crowned with a shard of dark crystal that pulsed with sinister power. Selbereth. Moreveth's voice echoed through the air, filled with venomous glee. I have come for what is mine. Selbereth's heart was steady, but she knew the gravity of the moment. The cathedral had never faced a threat like this, not in all the centuries of its existence. She stepped forward, her silver wings catching the dim light and refracting it across the darkening sky, sending a message to her angels below. Ready yourselves, she commanded, her voice calm but filled with a steely resolve. The forces of darkness come to test us, but they will not find us unprepared. The angels below raised their swords in unison, their wings shimmering in defiance of the approaching darkness. They had trained for this moment, and though many of them had never seen such evil, they would stand firm for their leader, for Selbereth, and for the sacred cathedral. The battle begins. The moment Moreveth's army reached the cathedral's outer perimeter, the air exploded with the clash of magic and steel. The dark sorceress raised her staff, and bolts of shadow lashed out at the towering spires, seeking to tear the sacred stones asunder. But the cathedral's defenses held strong, shimmering with the radiant power of the angels who had poured their light into the very foundation of the structure. Selbereth took to the skies, her silver wings spreading wide as she soared into the thick of the battle. With a cry, she raised her sword, its blade gleaming with a holy fire, and dived into the heart of Moreveth's army. Her blade cut through the creatures of shadow like a beacon of light through fog, and wherever it passed, darkness recoiled. Yet the sheer number of enemies was overwhelming. The angels fought valiantly, their swords and spears glowing with the light of heaven, but the dark creatures seemed endless, pouring from the black clouds like a plague. Selbereth's lieutenant, Archhiel, fought beside her, his golden wings ablur as he clashed with the dark-winged beasts that swooped down from above. "We cannot hold them off forever, my lady," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the din of battle. "There are too many. We will hold." Selbereth called back, her silver sword cutting through a winged demon that lunged at her. "We have no choice." But even as she spoke, she felt the pull of Moreveth's magic, a dark force like tendrils of night, trying to grasp her. Selbereth turned and saw the sorceress standing at the far edge of the battlefield, her violet eyes locked onto Selbereth with a chilling intensity. "Do you feel it, Selbereth?" Moreveth's voice hissed through the wind, carried on waves of dark magic. "The power of Agadam calls to you. You cannot resist it forever. Join me, and we can rule this world together." Selbereth faltered for only a moment, the truth of her origins pressing against the walls of her mind. She was born of Agadam's magic, after all. The portal's power flowed in her veins. But that power did not define her. She was Selbereth, the silver-winged, and her purpose was to protect the light, not to succumb to the darkness. "No," she whispered, steeling herself. "You will not have the cathedral. And you will not have me." With a burst of divine energy, Selbereth surged forward, her wings leaving a trail of silver light behind her as she flew straight toward Moreveth. The sorceress's eyes widened as Selbereth closed the distance, and she raised her staff, unleashing a torrent of dark magic in a desperate attempt to stop her. Selbereth's sword clashed with Moreveth's magic, and the impact sent shockwaves through the battlefield. Light and darkness warred in the sky, swirling together in a violent storm of power. For a moment, it seemed as though neither would yield, the forces of good and evil locked in an eternal struggle. But Selbereth's resolve was unshakable. She drew upon the light within her, the power of the cathedral and the angels who fought beside her. With a cry, she brought her sword down in a final, decisive strike, cleaving through Moreveth's magic and shattering the dark crystal atop her staff. Moreveth screamed, her power unraveling as the crystal broke. The sorceress staggered, her dark army faltering as the connection to their mistress was severed. With one last, desperate look, Moreveth retreated, her chariot of shadows vanishing into the storm as she fled the battlefield. Victory, but at a cost. As the darkness lifted, the remaining creatures of shadow dissolved into the wind, leaving only the angels standing beneath the once more brightening sky. The great cathedral stood tall, its stones unmarred by the siege, though the angels bore the marks of battle, wings torn, armor cracked, but their spirits unbroken. Selbereth landed softly on the cathedral's highest balcony, her silver wings folding around her like a cloak. She looked out over the battlefield, her heart heavy. They had won, but the cost had been great. Many angels had fallen, and the threat was far from over. Moreveth had escaped, and Selbereth knew she would return, stronger and more determined than ever. But for now, the cathedral stood, and the portal remained protected. Selbereth raised her eyes to the sky, whispering a silent prayer for those who had fought and fallen. She would have to confront her own darkness in the days to come, but today, she was still the silver-winged, still the protector of the great cathedral. And so long as she stood, no force, no matter how dark, would breach its sacred walls.